Everyone in this book was a dick. I wonder why my friend asked me to read it. He doesn't even read books. Oh, that's a game. Yeah, that makes more sense. So, I cleared everything and have nothing to do until the end of June. Also, thanks Kuru, I'm sure the 4.5 people who read the story really appreciated the spoilers in the event notification. Before we get into the review in earnest, I need to disclose my bias. Now, normal YouTubers would say they are sponsored here. Sadly, nobody is giving me money to write this crap, but my bias is much stronger. Remember that friend who recommended the game to me? See, he really hates Genshin Impact. The sheer enjoyment I got out of bullying him over it cannot be put into words. Luckily for me, I'm here to review Wuthering Waves, not the benefits of bullying your friends. I downloaded the game day one, installed it on my hard drive and tried to launch it. The launcher opened, downloaded the game and then got stuck on verifying files integrity. I found a fix on Reddit to set the launcher and the KR installer to high priority in the task manager, but it didn't work for me. No matter, I just opened the games folder and launched the game directly from the executable. The game can update and verify its own files, so I'm not sure what the point of a launcher even is. You can't even change the in-game settings in it. Once in the game, it took a while to load and was met with this stuttering mess. Yeah, this wasn't playable. My friend said he played it without issue and I knew he only had an SSD, so I tried to move the game over to my SSD on the day after. Usually it's reserved for Total War games, but I happened to have enough space. I still had the verifying files integrity bug, so I used the executable again. Okay, now we can play the game. I've heard that Kuru released some hotfix right after the first day, so I wasn't sure if it worked because of the SSD or the hotfix. To test it out, I installed the game on my hard drive again and tried to launch it. I've been trying to load into the game for 15 minutes. Okay, here we go. Let's see if this is playable a few weeks later. Nope, no way. Yeah, I probably wouldn't recommend this game if you don't have an SSD. In the game's defense, my hard drive is around 7 or 8 years old now. I took it out of my old laptop when I bought a new one. Despite that, other than long loading times, I've never noticed performance issues because of it. Genshin runs fine on the same hard drive. Enough about the technical shit. Let's get into the game. So, you're just chilling in outer space until some chick hits you down to Earth. Two girls find you there and quickly establish you have a severe case of protagonist. They decide to adopt you and take you home. On the way, the game alternates between teaching you the basics and dumping exposition at you. It caps off the tutorial with a pretty good boss fight that teaches you how to dodge and parry. It also shows you how to execute bosses at low health, and then this mechanic literally never shows up again, even if you fight the same boss again. With that, we are let loose into the open world. Let's leave the story for later. The game is pretty enough. There's a lot of variety in environments, from post-apocalyptic city to grassy hill to post-apocalyptic city, but some stuff are floating in the air for no reason. I was told the game looks better at lower brightness, so I gave that a try. It seems like it just changes the gamma, meaning how the color gets washed out at higher brightness settings. Whoever set the default so high shouldn't be allowed within 10 meters of a washing machine. Coloring aside, the game ran fine for me. There's some attempts to make the world feel alive beyond the NPCs. Enemy groups will sometimes fight each other or attack some NPC base. They look cool enough the first time you see them, but sadly they're all scripted. They're not even an event. If you reload them up, they'll respawn and fight again. The music is passable enough. Relaxing music when out of combat, tense music for combat, some extra tracks for bosses, usual stuff. For the most part it's used appropriately, but it's very blunt. Nothing really stood out to me. It's surprising because Kuru's other game has some standout tracks. But what about the gameplay? Huh, this kind of looks like Genshin. This really looks like Genshin. I'm sure it's different, there's just a few similarities. You even need flowers to level up your characters. The UI is by far the worst part for me. It's so damn similar it makes the game feel more like a mod than its own creation. Could dogmatically copy it even systems that suck ass in Genshin. For example, when you level up your weapon in Genshin, you can press a button to automatically select materials for it. This selects low level weapons first. Even after a few hours you'll have hundreds of low level trash weapons in your inventory, and they barely give any XP. Unless you want to click upgrade 20 times to get rid of them, what you have to do is manually select the weapon upgrade resources, which makes the auto select button completely pointless. Wuthering Wave's weapon upgrades function in exactly the same way. I can live with copying all their other shit, but why copy something completely pointless that is already bad in Genshin? There's even examples of things in the Kuro's other game, Punishing Grey Raven, that were outright better than Genshin's version, but they still copied Genshin. There are instances in which you acquire upgrade materials for your character, skills or weapons. You essentially enter a room sealed off by a loading screen, fight a few random enemies and then get some unique drop that you can't farm anywhere else. Once you pick up your loot, you can leave the instance or restart it, which puts you through a loading screen, so you can do it again, exactly like Genshin. Now here is why this drives me up the wall. In Punishing Grey Raven, if you want to farm an instance multiple times, you can simply set it so the enemy waves spawn one after the other. You beat them all and then collect the rewards for all of them. It's obvious to anyone that this is outright better because it saves you a bunch of pointless clicking. And yet they still chose to copy the inferior version. Somewhere in development they took a hard turn and tried to match almost everything in Genshin. Smells of executive meddling to me. Alright, enough whining about the Genshin copying. I think you get the point. Before I talk about what Wuthering Waves does different, I'll explain the basic gameplay loop. Calling it a Genshin copy is accurate, so I'm just entertaining the idea that somebody that never played Genshin is watching this. Skip to here if you don't need that explanation. You run around in the open world fighting monsters and looking for loot. Standard open world stuff. Most loot is from chests that you get either by ruthlessly murdering everyone in the general area or by solving one of those puzzles 3-year-olds do to check for developmental disorders. Unlike a typical open world game, this is also a gacha game, so the loot you find isn't useful equipment but currency for the slot machine the game is built around. Find enough loot to roll the slot machine, and maybe you get a new character with a new moveset to entertain you. If the open world can look pretty and make you curious about the story, then you're all set for a good experience. That's a summary of both Genshin and Wuthering Waves. I feel like that explanation sounded too negative. I like Genshin well enough. It's one of my go-to audiobook games.
I trotted up their garden and was turning round to the back when that fellow Earnshaw let me in, took my bridle and bid me go in by the front entrance. He patted Minnie's neck and said she was a bonny beast and appeared as if he wanted me to speak to him. I only told him to leave my horse alone or else it would kick him.
Turn off the sound, start the book and wander around looking for Skinner Woodbox currency. It's nice to occupy your hands while your brain is free to listen. On to what is distinct about WoW. You can climb on things faster. By the way, I've seen a lot of people particularly enjoying this change. Just in case, you have all played Prototype, right? If not, you should. The first one, to be clear. The two major differences are in the combat and its main enemies, the Tacet Discords. A Tacet Discord is, well, an ice cream flavor probably, but in the game they're the monsters you fight. Their mimics could try to copy something from the world, and they're generally hyper-violent and attack anything that looks at them funny. But some of the in-game stories imply they're capable of rational thought or even speech. The ones that caught my interest were the traffic lights and the car. Mimicking inanimate objects and attacking you is neat. I was hoping we'd have a washing machine that shoots bricks at your face, but sadly most of the others are either animals or humanoids. Household appliances trying to kill you is too good of a team to pass up. When you kill one of the monsters, a golden shadow is left behind, you absorb it with your iPhone 33, and you can now use it to fight for you. Some of them you summon to attack, others transform your character into one. They're not actual summons with their own health, instead they do one attack string and then disappear. There's no resource other than their cooldown, so you can spam them all you want as part of the basic combat loop. So, legally distinct Pokemon. Jokes aside, they're an interesting system. Yeah, you can use them as part of your combat loop, but there's also your equipment used to enhance your character stats. You get them constantly as you explore the overworld, instead of having to go out of your way to farm them. There are specific instances where you can farm certain kinds of Pokemon, and most bosses in the game drop elite Pokemon that you can only get from the boss. While this system already does a lot, I kind of wish they leaned into it even more. Rip off Monster Hunter a bit, get rid of the chests and puzzles, and just integrate even your gacha currency farm into getting new Pokemon. Would have given the game a pretty unique feel. As I was editing this video, I was informed that this game exists and is called Dragon's Dogma. Guess I'll go and have a look at that later. The second difference is the combat system, which is much closer to Kuro's other game. When you dodge an attack, you get a slow-mo effect and a chance to counter-attack. A lot of enemy attacks can be parried, which staggers them for a bit and damages the bar beneath their health. If you empty that bar, they become stunned for several seconds while you're free to attack them. Every character has their own unique skills, ultimate, passives, and you can have up to 3 characters in a team and can swap between them whenever. If you have a certain bar filled in, the swap comes with a special attack from the new character, and they get a temporary buff based on the character that was swapped out. You fill the bar when you attack enemies, some items help you charge it faster. By the way, I don't like how the bar is displayed. It's on the bottom left side of your screen, while your other characters and where you can see if they have their ultimate skills ready is on the top right side of the screen. A better way to display it would have been to have a colored bar around their character icons. This would also let you keep track of everyone's swap energy, instead of just the active character. What makes the combat work is that most characters are fun to use on their own, even without thinking about how they work in a squad. Characters feel smooth to control, and because they all have different animations, the parry timings are different for everyone. I like this, but to be fair, you might dislike having to relearn fights when you change your team around. Let's dig into my favorite character to show what makes the combat fun for me. Okay, so here's Dungeon. A small cute girl that wouldn't horrifically mutilate a fly. But it's all an act. She's just acting cute to attract child predators. Then she chops their dicks off. Game of the year. So, she deliberately gets into trouble to satisfy her murder boner. That's great, but how does she play? Unlike every other character, her skill has no cooldown. Instead, it drains a small amount of her health unused to do a bit of damage and fills up her energy bar. Every character has some energy bar that has some unique mechanic to them. Her skill can be combined with her basic attack to make one of two combos. The cross attack, which applies a debuff that gives Dungeon more damage, and the 3 hits, which buffs her heavy attacks. Her heavy attacks are a small judgment cut that does a bit of damage and has a bunch of iframes. But when her energy bar is at least 50% full, she consumes it, does a proper judgment cut, heals herself for a bit less than the health she used to charge it, and can finish it with another attack that applies another different debuff. If her energy bar is full, she does significantly more damage. Her ultimate is a bit basic by comparison, it's just a strong nuke skill. I adore characters with such extreme design. She has insanely high damage compared to any other character in her rarity, and has some great debuffs, allowing her to set up another character with her damage type, while having some unusual weaknesses. The obvious weakness is that she constantly drains her own health, so you need to be careful to avoid one-shots. But there is another more subtle weakness that stems from the design of the game. If you try to use Dungeon as your main DPS, and bring a couple of buff characters for her, you will get less value from their support than with most other DPS. This is because most characters' big damage hits are tied to their cooldowns, so you have a clear window where you can switch to your supports and apply your buffs. But Dungeon has no cooldowns, so every second she isn't on the field is a bit of wasted damage on her. She can still benefit from buffs of course, but the practical effect is diminished. What a fun weakness to play around. It makes you very conscious of exactly when you use your buffs, because they feel pointless without careful planning. A small detail of Dungeon's kit I enjoy is that every single one of her moves can parry enemy attacks. This makes boss fights feel very smooth, and I always end up trying to parry boss moves with one of my own, since it feels so cool, even though it just kills me half the time. Now, while Dungeon is by far my favorite character in the game, every character has their own unique attack animation, skill, passives, and some resource bar that has a unique effect. Team building becomes great fun with such variety, since even the supports that you pop in for buffs have similar depth. Actually figuring out what characters do is where this game stumbles though. Gacha games have been in a competition for years to produce the most annoying, needlessly complicated description humanly possible, and WoW is a top contender with this infernal travesty. So this explains what your left mouse button does. Almost all of this text is completely useless. Here is what you need. This tells you what ice cream flavor damage type your character uses. This one is Raspberry Havoc. Everything else explains basic moves, light attack, heavy attack, jump, etc. They're the same for everyone, and what's different about their damage values and animations cannot be seen here. Finally, the character has some unique mechanic tied to their left mouse button. This one has a parry, that's not really a parry. Dungeon gets to do her second combo right after a dodge, etc. Not every character has some unique effect on their left mouse button, but a lot to do. Every single skill and passive is written in this overly descriptive manner, when you could convey the information far more efficiently with way less text. You don't have to be concerned with the walls of text explaining what characters do until you get into some late game stuff though. For most open world content, you can consistently clear it by smashing your face into the right section of your keyboard, or your phone I guess. If you are just here for the combat, this is by far the game's biggest issue. While the open world technically scales with your level, you will very quickly become too strong for it. There are a few basic enemies around the map that don't scale with your level. They're meant as mini boss challenge fights. Their drop is something that seems rare when you're new, but is absolutely mundane once you get to higher levels, so they're just here for the challenge. They're a good showcase for the combat. Even though they're basic overworld enemies, they have a surprisingly diverse moveset. Beyond these enemies, there isn't much to challenge you in the open world. There are bosses, but once you have a solid team setup, you can kill them in a few seconds with minimal hassle. You can keep your characters under-leveled like a friend of mine does, or switch to using under-leveled characters if you want to challenge yourself, but that just turns enemies into big chunky HP bricks. It slows down your progression, and there is endgame content to get to. Events aside, there's currently two types of endgame content. The Spire will be the Tower of Adversity. Sure, whatever. You fight random enemies in a flat circular arena with random power-ups depending on the specific level. Every character has 10 energy and they use between 1 and 4 of it depending on the fight. Once you're done with one tower, the energy is reset for the next one. The rewards for clearing it are mostly gacha currency. The tower resets around once a month. After you've explored the open world, this will be your main gacha currency source along with the dailies. Oh yeah, I haven't talked about the dailies. They're kind of worse than Genshin's dailies, which makes them better. They're worse in the sense that there is no depth to them. Most of them are just go to this marker on the map and kill 5 enemies, so you can do them in 30 seconds, while Genshin has whole mini quests and stories. This is worse cause it's less content, but better cause who the fuck wants mini quests in their dailies, what the hell? The other endgame are the holograms. There's currently 4 of them in the game. I hope they keep adding them. They take an overworld boss, stick a timer on it, and you can have a go at it with multiple difficulties. At first I thought this would also just be a DPS check, which to be fair they absolutely are, but the bosses also get new attacks or mechanics on higher difficulties that change the fights around. Let's have a look at the Thundering Mephis, who is probably the best fight in the game currently. Mephis is one of those fights that sounds extremely unfair but is well balanced. He goes invisible, teleports around, has a bunch of high damage attacks. The invisibility is mostly harmless and just there for effect, with one exception. The teleportation is designed so that he will always try to teleport in your vision. All of his attacks can be consistently parried or dodged, and have clear tells. Attacks have diverse animations, so it's easy to tell what he's doing once you're used to the fight. So he teleports in, attacks you, you dodge or parry, and then get a chance to counter. It plays a lot like the Nightmare King fight, but in 3D. On higher difficulties he gains a clone that uses his own attacks at random and disappears if parried. I enjoy fighting him a lot on higher difficulties, but I think the clone might push the fight a bit too far for most people. The clone has no cooldown, no tail on when he starts his attack. Even though he is synchronized with the boss attack, the clone has such a wide number of attacks that they might as well be random. You can master the fight and dodge everything perfectly, of course, it's great fun, but the boss has some junk that brings it down for me. After you stagger the boss, he gets up in a few seconds, goes invisible and starts some attack. Certain attacks will hit you before he becomes visible again. Now, you can tell what attack he's doing, even while he's invisible if you're familiar enough with this fight, but that takes way too much experience. The second junk isn't exclusive to this fight, and it's what I refer to as the stagger junk. When you stagger a boss enemy, the game goes in slow-mo, and for a couple of seconds you're locked out of using anything other than basic attacks. You can't even dodge or change characters. This is for cinematic effect, I suppose, so you can get a cool shot of the boss falling down. You can bypass the stagger junk if you stagger the boss by using your ultimate, but otherwise you're stuck with it. Here's why it causes an issue in this fight. The clones also count as bosses, and you stagger them with one parry. Since the clones have synchronized attacks with the boss, you can end up parrying the clone and then being walked out of using your skills or dodging while the real boss hits you. It's particularly frustrating when the clones do an attack that needs an instant response. You can parry them out of muscle memory and get yourself killed for reacting quickly. I've never seen a game actively punish you for parrying before. The third thing I'd like to talk about isn't really junk per se, but it's a bit unusual. If you use the walk-on feature in this fight, you are actively making it harder for yourself. This is because the arena isn't all that big. I mentioned before that the boss tries to teleport in your vision, but if you force him back into a wall, he will have to teleport outside of your vision range. There is a way to stop him from doing this. If you manually control your camera and make sure it's always facing the center of the arena, you can give the boss space to use all his moves. This makes him much easier to read and react to. He is still a fun boss though. Most bosses in games have some weird junk, so don't take this as some damning criticism. The walk-on system deserves it far more. I've seen a lot of confusion about the walk-on system in this game, and I wanted to test it out and explain how it works in this video. After screwing around with it for an hour or two, this is the conclusion I came to. I have no fucking clue how it works, shit is insane, man. Hello, Editing Gun here. When I was writing the script I didn't get how the lock-on works, but now I do. So you have the full walk-on, where you select a target and it sticks to it, and you have the automatic one. The way the automatic one works is that it essentially picks the target that's closest to you. If you press any of the directional keys, forward, backwards, left, right, it will search for a target in that direction. You can see me change the targets constantly here because I'm pressing the directional keys in different directions. It seems a bit odd and I've never seen it in another game, but if you try it out for yourselves it feels more intuitive than it looks. Just remember, when you press the directional key, the character searches for a target in that area, as long as they're in range. Obviously it's more noticeable with ranged characters because they have a longer range. Give it a try yourselves and you get the hang of it. Full walk-on the other hand does still have some issues. Back to the script. You can also use walk-on against multiple enemies which behaves consistently enough, but I dislike using walk-on in general since I prefer to control the camera myself. Auto targeting aside, the walk-on has a pretty severe issue. If I'm going to give up the free camera, I want the walk-on to stick to the target and never let go, but it's actually fairly easy to break the walk-on. If you switch your character, the camera will briefly focus on them. If an enemy does some attack that moves them out of your vision at that point, it can break the walk-on. While this is the most consistent way to break the walk-on, some enemies can break it on their own. The morning Ixboss is a particularly annoying example, since it's quite literally the only enemy in the game on which I bothered to use walk-on. It has several attacks where it flies straight up and then dives you for a grab attack that insta-kills. You need to see him coming in order to react and parry the grabs, but this very move can break the walk-on and leave you confused, making it much harder to parry the grab. By the way, this boss is a buggy mess in its own right. Some of its attacks breaks its spacing and just leave it hanging in the air afterwards. It used to have damage hitboxes in front of its parry window, so you get damaged even if you parry him. Some of his attack animations don't match the hitboxes, and though I don't have a recording, I once had a character just die off screen to him. You won't hear a lot of people complaining about him though, because he has next to no health. Can't be a hard boss if you die in 3 seconds. Walk-on and camera issues aside, the combat is responsive enough. Hopefully they fix it up in a patch so I don't feel like I'm fighting the camera every time I get into a fight. Or at least include a camera Pokemon that fucks with your vision. I'll take that too. How can we only have a traffic light in a car? That's so underbaked. So overall, the gameplay can be described as Genshin with sweatier combat. It's an odd choice because you need to both enjoy Genshin's relaxing pace and also want sweatier combat. There's clearly a market for it, judging by how often I see people complaining about Genshin having no endgame. Hell, I'm one of those people who can enjoy both parts, albeit for different reasons. Alright, this game has a story. I sorta forgot to talk about it. Just as well, a lot of people don't interact with gacha stories at all. To summarize without any spoilers, it's a post-apocalyptic setting. Some random magic bullshit happened that now spawns monsters everywhere. The magic bullshit also made some people into wizards and they fight monsters. There's also evil dick wizards who are also dicks because it's harder to write an engaging story when all the enemies are faceless goons. I wanted to go into more detail for the story, but then I realized that would require sitting through it a second time and I gave up on that idea. My dislike for it aside, I think it's worth pointing out that the 2 character quests are far more competently written than the main story. As you can probably tell at this point, the game had a rather troubled development and was a bit rushed out. Apparently they ended up rewriting their entire story between the closed beta test and the full release. I looked it up and from what little I saw of it, the closed beta story was for the most part better written. It had better pacing, introduced more of the cast and showed you more of the world. From what I understood, they rewrote it because the test group didn't like how antagonistic it was to the player. That's all well and good, but some of the missing elements were in no way antagonistic. You had entire character quests that delve into the character's personality that had very little to do with the protagonist at all, and they just weren't added back in for the rewrite. It's weird. In the current story, the moment you go to the main city, they stick you in some office and make you stand around for 30 minutes, all in service of barely introducing 2 characters and doing some vague foreshadowing. The studio is definitely capable of better writing, so I'll give it a try when they release new content, but the first area's main quest is just a huge slog. Except this guy, best character in the story. He said like 2 funny lines, way above everyone else. Alright, that's about all I have to say for this game.